Hi everyone, and welcome to the next in our series of international roundtable discussions. This one is focused on firefighter well-being. The aim of today is to take an holistic look at firefighter well-being. Each panelist brings a different perspective, but is aligned in their drive to protect the well-being of firefighters. It's a real privilege to spend time with such an exceptional group of people from around the world. As always, we've done intro videos via LinkedIn. So if you haven't had the chance to look at them, I encourage you to go and look at them afterwards. It does save us time and allows us to get straight onto the topic. If you don't want to miss any future events, follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next month, we have a discussion focused on training, and following that, we have a great lineup of people discussing smart cities for emergency services. If you would like to find out more about OpsCentral, please contact me directly or via our website. I'll ping my LinkedIn details and email address in the comment box in a second. Let's get started. Feel free to post questions and comments. We'll do our best to respond to everybody, but I do encourage the panel, if you see a question that you can answer in the time, feel free to type and answer, share links, share resources. We're all here to learn from each other. Right, panel, let's get started. And the first question is going to Anthony and Andrew. Welcome.
Morning.
Hi. Morning. There are many pillars to firefighter well-being. What are they and how do they impact each other?
You can go, Andrew, if you want, mate.
Cool, thank you. So the way I'd approach this, I'll use a model of well-being that we use here in New Zealand, and it's called Te Whare Tapa Whā. So that's our Indigenous language, being Māori. And the model was developed by Sir Dr. Mason Jury in the late 90s. So it looks at, I guess, well-being as being a whare or a house, and that whare has four sides, which make up four components, or I will say four pillars of well-being. So and I'll go through each wall of our whare, but it's important to remember that yes, before you build a house or a whare, you need to make sure that the land underneath it is very stable. So the whenua is strong. So you wouldn't build your house necessarily on a uneven ground that's all swampy and horrible. So the house will fall down. So if I look at the four sides, so you've got taha wairua, which is your spiritual health. So your connection to, I guess, what feeds your soul, making things that make you feel well. And it's important that you connect with those. It could be a spiritual thing. It could be just that, as I say, what feeds your soul. So I guess for me, it would be going out in the water, in the ocean, and connecting with nature in that way. Then you've got another part of the wall is your taha tinana, which is your physical health. So how physically well you are. So, if you've got sore knees, elbows, and how that can impact on your overall well-being. Then you've got your taha whānau, or your family. And I guess for firefighters, the sense of family, not only your immediate family, but also the fire family. You spend significant amount of time with people, be it in response capability or just hanging around at the station or the whatever. So how that links. And the last one is your taha hini ngaro, or your mental health. So how well you feel psychologically. And what the model looks at, if one part of those four walls of your house or your whare is weak or you're struggling, then it's not going to support the roof, and eventually your whare or your house will fall down. So those four pillars need to be strong, and sometimes we need support to make them strong in order to keep our house solid and stable and stand upright. So that's how I'd look at that question. Over to you, Anthony.
Cool. I'll probably take it from a slightly different perspective in that I look at, I think to some extent, well-being, particularly in Australia, and the concept has been hijacked somewhat by a lot of people who are I'm not entirely sure of their perspective and their motives in some things, in that in some ways we use a lot of the well-being concept and umbrella as a catch-all to a tick box for employers to say, look, we've got that, we've ticked the box, we've got an employee assistance program or whatever. Here's some yoga and some fruit bowls. Go ahead and do your thing. So I think broadly expanding on what Andy's talking about, which is spot on. I think we need to also start to consider what wellbeing looks like in the firefighting context. In that, I think we need to split particularly the health into its one silo, whereby we are addressing all those concepts: the mental health, the spiritual readiness, the physical health. But we also need to understand as well that they have to deliver a level of performance within their organisation to not only do their job effectively, but also to do it safely. And a lot of that comes down to because they interact with each other, so that should there be some sort of injury to the person, that then has impacts onto their lifestyle. So if they're injured, they're then taken off a fire truck. They then lose their concept of self. Those sorts of things. We put them into an environmental. So my PhD was looking at heat stress, and we know that when we expose people to heat at any level, what we do is we see an immune cascade similar to that we see in a clinically depressed population. So what we're actually doing within our lifestyle and our well-being in our jobs, we're actually putting people at risk. And if we're not addressing those things through proactive measures, I think that's where we're starting to fall over. I think the only other way I'd go at the moment is the US Army has gone down the H2F model, and it's exactly as Andy said, with just a little bit more on it. It's their house has 5 arms to it. It's the physical resilience, mental resilience, the spiritual resilience, but it also focuses on sleep and the critical impact of sleep on health and well-being, and also nutrition, about when we eat, why we eat, how we do that, because all of those things, when they're not working together, we have massive impacts on people. The only other thing I think we need to do is we need to delineate the difference between what you're required to do for your job. So there's a very physical element to the job, and I worry somewhat when you see with the Twitters and the Facebooks about the whole concept of you've got to be fit, otherwise your mates are going to let your mates down, someone's going to die, as opposed to going to the core of why people are there and what they want to be. And I think that does go directly to the core. And Andy's got some great words with the Maori language that explain a lot of this stuff. But what exactly is a person? What drives that person, and how do we support them in that drive? That would be my sort of answer to that question.
Great, thank you very much. Two awesome perspectives there. Right, the next question is to Eric and Chief Ryan. How much more importance is placed on well-being now compared to the past, and is it enough?
Chief.
Okay, so greetings all, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. So this is my 30th year in the fire service here in the United States, and I can tell you, anybody who's been around that long here would say that the emphasis on firefighter well-being is dramatically different now than it was in the early 1990s and prior years to that. So much more focus on awareness of the dangers of the job as relating to the physical, mental, spiritual well-being of the men and women that perform the tasks. And so, great strides have been made, more strides need to be made, but certainly we have come a very long way here in the United States over the past 30 years. Compared to the past, and is it enough? So I'm not sure it's ever enough, right? But everything has to be in balance. Certainly from the fire chief's perspective, you can't place all the eggs in one basket, right? Our people are our greatest resource, and we certainly want to make sure we take care of them as best we can within the budgetary confines that are allotted to us by our municipal leaders and ultimately the taxpayers. But there are things we can always do to improve, and sometimes it doesn't. There are things that we can do and should have done decades ago that don't cost anything or cost very little in terms of dollars and cents, but there is a bit of a cultural cost sometimes to those with respect to the time-honored traditions of the fire service and the willingness of firefighters to move off of some of those traditions, not sacrificing them, but perhaps amending them a little bit to more align with known realities and known hazards. So, yeah, certainly we have come a long way, and we're doing, at least here in the United States, I know much better. But there is more work to be done, and the 4-sided house, the 5-sided house. Those are great analogies, and we could probably spend an hour to an hour and a half talking about every one of those and all the components of those that were not met in the past, being met now, and need to be met in the future. But that's sort of my perspective on that.
Thank you, Chief. Well, to start with, I think the answer Chief Ryan gave is pretty much in line with what I would like to answer from a perspective of here in the Netherlands, in Europe. So when I was preparing this answer, the answer to this question, I thought, well, I'm gonna tell something about more from a personal perspective. You must know that I'm the son and grandson of firefighters, so I'm very used to having firefighters in my environment. Actually, they're in my family, and when I was a little boy, my dad came from work every day, and well, he never told me anything about what was happening while he was on duty, but there was something with him. So one of the things that's a big problem when my father was a firefighter was that has to do with mental health issues, I think, because in a later stadium, after he was retired, he started to act a bit strange, and we found out that he actually had been through so much during his career that he had big problems with his mental health, and that finally ended up in two attempts of suicide. And fortunately, he didn't succeed in that. But that was one of the things that happened in the past. So when I look at mental health issues nowadays in the fire service, is that after every incident, people they're all educated colleagues of firefighters. They're all waiting for the firefighters coming back in the firehouse and start to talk about what they have been through. So that's a big difference in an approach of mental health issues. The other thing had to do with physical and medical testing. Because once I was aware of what my dad did all the time, I thought, well, that must be a physically demanding job that he has. And I was only 10 years by then, so I already saw, well, something it's physical demanding, and that there have to be some health issues as well with that. But I asked him, well, what are the requirements that you have to go through, and how do they test it? And I was a very little boy by then, but I saw something that was not going wrong. It was not going good. And the thing is that when we look at physical and medical testing nowadays, and I'm very happy that I was involved in the development of medical and physical testing here in the Netherlands. Because somewhere this little kid was still in me and had the same questions. And what you see is that in the early days, testing, physical and medical testing was only driven by opinions of people who didn't know anything about it. So they were all opinion-based testing. But nowadays, we are the testing like physical and medical testing is all evidence-based, and we make big steps in that. But it doesn't say that we are already there, because the whole process of testing and all the consequences and how we can do interventions to become more healthy. We are still in developmental process, and I think I will come back to that later on the next question that I'm involved in. So thank you, Debbie. That was my answer for now.
Brian, and thank you, Eric. I particularly want to thank you for being so open. I guess we talk a lot about firefighter health, but the impact of any kind of health challenges goes a lot further than, and I think experiencing it firsthand as a child, I can see why that's motivated you to be involved. So thank you. Right, the next question I'm going to put to both Sarah and to Lieutenant Ruth Smith. What can we do to support those who experience traumatic events when responding to an incident? Right.
Hello, everyone. What can we do to help anyone in the fire department, firefighter, when they've gone through a traumatic event? I'm going to go a little around, well, not around this question, but I think it starts the day that we're born. It starts with perception, and it starts also with mentality. I go to the gym a lot, and it is at this moment a female, and she's pregnant, and she's having a little boy. And so her husband comes to the gym, and some of the ladies in there, we decided to get together and give her a gift. So without me thinking, I got a paint gift. And so the husband kind of looked at it, and he was like, "It's pink." I said, "Yeah." And so right there at an early age, and we're in first responders, and firefighting is traditionally a male dominated society. So the first things that we tell little boys is that don't cry. So when you grow up with that, and now you have to being a leader of men, and something happens, we want to say, toughen up. You can't show emotion. You can't do this. People show emotions different ways. So I'm thinking that it's our mentality that can help people. And I think the chief on the previous question said it's a tradition of the fire service that we just suck it up, but we have to allow the opportunity for people to express themselves openly and freely before they go to outside metrics, negative outside metrics, like, alcohol, drugs, or one of those things. So when we're around the station, it is very great to know the person, know if they're okay, know if they're not. I can tell I've worked around my coworkers, and I know them more than I know a lot of people in my family because I'm here with them. So I know when something's not going right. So the best thing that we can do is definitely support them. Make sure that they know that they can come to you, because a lot of firefighters don't come to you because they are like, well, I didn't go to this person, I didn't go to this officer because I'm afraid that they would say something to somebody else. So make sure that that they know that they can come to you, and it won't go as far as it's gone. And to be educated so that if you don't know the steps to get them help, that they can get the help that they need. It should be, a department situation. I love mealtime. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat, and I'm from the South in the United States, and we fry everything. So I just sit there, and I get to know my firefighters. I get to know what they like, what they don't, and I get to tell how they are, so that if I see something wrong, especially after and it doesn't have to be on scene, something traumatic. We just had a firefighter that his wife had a miscarriage. That's traumatic, because I don't want that firefighter going into any structure and their head is not right. And I went to that firefighter and asked them, hey, is everything okay? Are you mentally okay? And the firefighter said yes. And a couple of weeks after that, the firefighter said, thanks for checking on me.
I think, I'm not sure that I can do better than that, but I would say that I agree with everything that you just said. And I would also say that, the question in terms of how can we support them when they're experiencing traumatic events when responding to incidents? And I would say that I think if you're doing it when people are responding to incidents, you're too late. I think you have to have those resources and those relationships built up ahead of time. We have, when we look at the data on what's effective, it's having a program that's built before it's ever needed by anyone. It's making sure that you have folks who are trained up on how to have that conversation, because it is like, and you gave the perfect example of, like, we train little boys not to cry, and we tell them that that's not manly, so don't do it. it's also not manly to reach out to someone and be like, hey, how, you know, are you doing okay? Or I've noticed that something's off with you. What's going on? And so I think that supporting people as they respond to incidents is too late. It has to be kind of the big picture ahead of time. People have to be invited to know how to talk to people and how to keep track of other people and how other people are doing and monitor. Because honestly, sometimes the worst person to assess how someone's doing is someone themselves. You know, and it's in my family, like I have to be. I feel like I'm of course always right and always fine. But my sisters will sometimes be like, hey, you're like, I don't know what's up with you, but is everything okay? Because you've been different, or I haven't heard from you in a while, or whatever it is. And so I think it's helping people learn that it's okay to do those types of things, but then to reach out. And like you said, people appreciate that. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it in the moment, or it's intimidating in the moment, but knowing that and setting the expectation that that's just what we do. We just take care of each other, and doing that in the big picture before anyone goes to any type of traumatic incident that might bother them.
Thank you both. It has actually made me think it's the same kind of worldwide in every industry, and in terms of how the cultural perspectives on discussing feelings and reaching out to each other, but it's magnified in an industry that's so much higher intensity and risk. So appreciate your honesty. Right, the next question we're going to put forward to Chief Richardson and Chief Kerrigan. What impact do leadership, team dynamics, and cultural dynamics have on well-being? Let's start with you, Chief Richardson, because you're at the top of the screen. Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think the impact is huge. The cultural dynamics and leadership are the foundation of teams and organizations, whether it's a fire service or elsewhere. We as leaders need to make firefighter well-being a priority. And we do this by developing up and coming leaders in our organizations to understand the importance of knowing their people. And when I say knowing your people, I mean, as Selena said, knowing them well enough to know when things are going well, but more importantly, knowing them well enough to know when things are not going well. You know, often in the fire service, we get out of sync. Earlier, we talked about the calls, the family life. You think about all the balancing that we have to do in the fire service, and it's very easy to get out of balance doing that. The best thing we can do is help our members realize that everyone goes through that. Anybody that's been in the fire service for any measurable amount of time knows that wane of motivation and dealing with problems and those types of things. So what we need to do as leaders is normalize that and let people know that it's okay. We can work through that together if that's something they choose. But most importantly, as leaders, we can simply show up for them and we can listen. The best thing we can do is take the time to let them talk and listen and see, look at the nonverbal cues and see where they're at. We have plenty of programs that are helpful in this, and I'll talk about that in our other question that I have, but really being able to listen and understand our people drives that leadership, and that's really how that culture moves forward.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more, and I would add only that you know, a lot of the fire service is built on like a credibility factor, right? So if we're going to want to take care of our people, and whatever it is, whether it's behavioral health, physical fitness, medical evaluations, whatever that is, credibility is key. And part of that, a big part of that is walking the talk, right? So whether you're a fire chief or the rookie firefighter doesn't make a difference to me. We should all be leading by that same example. So if I'm sitting behind my desk and ordering work out or get their medical evaluations or whatever it is, and I'm not participating in that myself, and I'm not advocating for that myself, then I think the message gets lost. And the other part to that leadership equation is that we have to remember that the color of our helmets and this stuff here on our collars really, you know, it's cliche to a point in fire service, but that doesn't really make you a leader. What makes you a leader is your example. And we have examples of good leadership all throughout the ranks in our fire service. And I would actually submit that our company officer level folks and senior people on the floor are some of the most important and effective or ineffective, depending on their attitude, leaders that the fire service has. So you do not have to wait till you are of a certain rank or stature in the fire service to be that leader. You just have to start doing it and show that example to everybody else and advocate for what's best for us, as we've all discussed already, that you know, our most important asset here is our people, not the things that we buy and the trucks that we ride on. So leadership to me comes from all levels, and it starts with walking the talk.
Thanks, Dan. Right, and in counter to that, what impact does someone who is not in optimal shape have on the rest of the team and on incident outcomes? And I'm going to throw this back to Andy and to Chief Strike.
Andy,
you go first, Chief. You go first, Chief.
All right. Hello, everybody. Jerry Strike here from the Twin Cities in Minnesota in the United States. The optimal shape, or what is the optimal condition of a firefighter or an individual that you work with, is really the big question, right? Let's talk about physical shape. And I'll sort of throw out a scenario for you. I think there's enough people on the call and maybe viewing and in the world who knows who they may not want to go on a line with for one reason or another. And in my career, 32 years, I can think of several people that I thought, you know, if I get on the line with this individual, I know that one, we're probably going to come out early, right? Because my cardiorespiratory is probably in a little better condition. I'm controlling my breathing, whatever it is. And two, the concern that may be an individual that I may have to get out of a scenario when I'm trying to mitigate a problem, right? So how does an individual affect your outcomes on a fire scene related to their physical health? It can have tremendous impacts. It can also have a positive impact. And I believe, and always have, you know, I came into the fire service young. I came out of the military as a combat medic, and I had this expectation that the fire service was very similar. And we had a loyalty to one another. We had to be loyal to one another in our battalions and in our platoons, much like we have to in our companies and on the floor at the fire station, because no one else can do what we do. If I get hurt inside a IDLH environment, there's no one else that can come help me. The mayor can't help me. The police can't help me. No one else can help me but my partners. So then the question comes up, and I've been down this road myself in my own physical health and well-being many times, is what is optimal shape? We can look at marketing in the United States, and marketing would mean that I'm just a little skinny guy, and you know, I should be buffed out and these big macho firefighters with all the muscles, but that isn't the case. And I think there's several people online, and hopefully you hear from Todd here in the future and others about what is optimal shape in the fire service or just as an individual. I think we're born to walk. We're born to, you know, stay flexible and be able to lift, be able to carry the tools that are responsible to us on the scene when we're assigned a task. But I believe in strongly that we have a loyalty to one another to maintain our fitness at whatever level that is, because there's no one else that can do our job. On the mental health issue, and it's been discussed, is we have to come to the fire station with a strong mental game. Now, all of us are on the lower part of the algorithm sometimes, and I like to talk about this when I teach, is we all have an algorithm, right, in our organizations, and some of us are at the top and some of us are at the bottom. And if we can maintain that nice line of cohesiveness and so on, we're going to be effective. But when we're all on the bottom of the algorithm, whether it's culture or an incident that happened or something, we need to try to get back up. But we know through science and through situational awareness and everything else that the fire service offers, and all the experts in the world that our brain changes under stress. And our brain can have an impact on the simple things. For example, hearing, auditory exclusion, one of the first things to go when you're under a high stress, complex environment. And that can impact us if somebody's yelling for help or somebody's telling us not to open that door and we don't hear it because of our body and the science and the stress that changes our body. But it can impact the outcome of our incident. If I'm not in shape, we measure our success on the fire scene many times by time. Time is of essence. And if I can't get that extra minute of stretching to that bedroom because my alarm's sounding and my policy says not just Jerry go out, but we all go out, report to the next team who comes in, that can have a big impact. So yeah, your health mentally and physically can have positive and negative outcomes on the fire scene. Andrew?
Fantastic. Thanks, Chief. When I looked at this question, I was like, oh, optimal shape. I used to be a personal trainer in former life. So I was like, let's just get in the gym, 6 weeks to shred. Let's all get massive type thing. And that's the stereotype of firefighters, which is often perceived. But, you don't want someone 6'6" climbing in a confined space necessarily. You might someone a little smaller. But if you want someone to carry, 400 pounds or whatever, then maybe you want someone really strong. So there is an optimal thing, but I'll guess I'll leave the physical thing because I guess it's easier to look at and as the chief said, when you're responding to a call or whatever, you can look at your crew and you understand their physical attributes because you can see them. So I'll focus a little bit more on, I guess, the psychological attributes, and if someone's not in optimal shape, that way, because that can have significant impact, both good and bad, on the crew. And we know from some research that if someone is struggling or is under any sort of psychological distress, and if they're in a decision-making role, that can be detrimental. So they're more prone to making errors, and those errors, certainly on the fire ground, when they're time critical and you've got your crew's life in your hands sometimes on your decisions, or the public, that can have a detrimental effect. So if you're not in optimal shape psychologically, that has a massive impact on how you respond, but also how you interact with your crew, and you're part of and we've talked about this fire family. And I think Selena talked a little bit about she knows her crews better sometimes than some of her family members because of the amount of time we spend with them. So I think if we have our crews and we increase the psychological literacy of our people, they can better understand when people are going through some stuff, and make allowances and hold space for people. I think it's really important. Firefighters love to fix things, so by nature they want to turn up and make things better. And sometimes with our psychological injuries, or when we're in distress, fixing it is not what firefighters can do. Sometimes necessarily don't have the skills to do that, but just holding space for someone and allowing them and saying, hey, I know you're not your best today, but I'm here to help and we'll get through this. Because we can see if they limp into the mess or into the firehouse, and they've got a limp, and you go, you know what, Andy's got a bit of a limp today. I'll tell you what, if we have to run hose today, I'll do the bulk of it. I'll help them out because that's what we do as a family. And I think that the other thing, I think Dan touched on it a little bit, is around listening to people. And I know when I talk about well-being to some of our crews, I always say to them, listen with the intent to understand, not to respond. Because sometimes we get trapped in that, I know the answer to this question. Like Jerry's asked me a question. I was like, yeah, shut up, Jerry. I've got the answer. Just let me speak because I've got all the answers. But we don't allow people to actually share their issues and actually listen to them because we want to no, I've got this. I can fix this. So I'd say around optimal shape, holding space for people is so important. But I think we're going to get to who's the buffest firefighter around the world. Maybe we can have a competition later.
I think we have them already.
Thank you both. I'm going to add to this question, but I'm going to put this one to Todd and Anthony. What effective ways are there to measure and monitor well-being, and do you believe they should be mandatory? And off the back of what Strike said, if you can add what is optimal shape, and how do we look at it?
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Debbie. Appreciate it. Great discussion so far. I'm so honored to be part of this great panel, and a lot of insightful information today. And so I obviously there's all types of metrics that are out there. I think we're on the cutting edge of what that looks like when we're talking about biometric monitoring, whether that's a ring that monitors your biometrics, your sleep, your temperature, your physiological state, the effects of artificial intelligence, and where that may take us as an industry. But when I look at where we're at stateside, and it's likely the same internationally from talking to colleagues, probably the single most important item that we can do, I believe, as an industry, is to have comprehensive annual medical exams and physicals. I've seen that in my work with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, where I work with Dan carrying closely on the Safety, Health, and Survival Section Board. Now I sit on the NFPA Technical Committee. In my role with LifeScan, we see close to 50,000 first responders, and one of the things we do is take a comprehensive approach. So an annual baseline assessment of physical readiness, human performance, and how that correlates to the ability to perform our 13 essential job functions. Our NFPA in the US, 1582 physical exam, which is our look at our occupational health of our first responders. And then I believe, and I think we have the data at LifeScan that we've been doing it for over 2 decades, is enhancing that with early imaging detection. So we know, whether we're talking about cardiac risk, 80% of firefighters' deaths have enlarged left ventricle, and cardiac myopathy with subclinical cardiac disease, or on the cancer front, oftentimes, tragically, we don't start testing and going down the road of testing until symptoms are present, and oftentimes it's much too late for a good outcome. Yet we know firefighters have in the States 9% higher prevalence of overall of cancer, and a 14% higher mortality than general public. So if I had to, in the 4 walls of the question, I think the single largest thing we can do is comprehensive annual physicals, including physical assessment. In the States, that's NFPA 1583. So we've got that baseline, and we can notice, we can give coaching, we can do early intervention, we can course correct over the course of the next year. And for those that are interested, the IFC's put out a great guide to firefighter physicals for healthcare providers. Walks through in a very short, condensed 2, 3, 4 page outline what are the elevated risk, what are the increased testing that should be considered. So, and unfortunately, the work of the IFC that we've done as recently as 2016, stateside shows still about, I think the number was 40% of our volunteer firefighters, about 20% of our career firefighters are receiving no type of annual medical exams or screening. And the ones that are receiving something, it's not necessarily occupationally specific, and only about 10% of any of the screenings that are being done include a behavioral health component. Yet We know in our industry that's a significant occupational risk. So, and I'll just close by the question you asked, or a component of it was, do I believe they should be mandatory? I do. And, I believe it's how it's implemented. And it can be implemented, I like to say, with a carrot instead of a stick. With the focus being on, this is about early detection and helping you safely do your job, survive the service, enjoy a long and beautiful retirement with your kids and grandchildren and family. So it's, I think a lot of, when people hear the word mandatory, it conjures up a concern, but I think it's like anything in life, it's how it's implemented. So thank you for the opportunity to tackle that one. And I hope with all the metrics that are out there, looking at this as a starting point for a baseline, probably can provide the largest return on investment.
All right, Todd, awesome, mate. I'm definitely with you in the medical. And the thing in Australia at the moment is we're somewhat luckier than you in that our healthcare system in Australia is top notch. We have access to that, and any medical screening that we have will be integrated with that. At the moment, we're currently moving into that space, particularly around medical screening. We have the presumptive legislation around cancers, which is driving a lot of our decision making there. We have a very contested industrial environment, however, which is making this very problematic in the medical screening area. I guess what I might do, rather than go back over what Todd's done, I just agree with you 100% on that, mate. I think, well, that's the way to go. I think more from a physical perspective, and I go back to my original conversation where I said that we need to delineate the difference between well-being and fitness. I think they're constantly added together as a piece, and what that does is it causes some level of uncertainty and friction within firefighters. And I go back to one of the statements that, you've probably heard this in a multiple ways of doing this, but I think it's less important for us to test than it is to test what's important. I think we collect a lot of data, we test a lot of stuff, and we don't actually know what we're testing for. What do we do with the data? We're in an age now where, as Todd said with the wearables, I've got a Whoop band on that I'm trialing at the moment. The data is just simply not good enough to rely on to make decisions that ultimately affect lifestyle and life trajectories of our individuals. I think we need to go back to the fundamentals, particularly in the physical space, to say, what exactly is the job? Why do you need to be fit? What does fitness look like? And I think too much, and Eric nailed it early on, in that too many decisions have been made based on the way I used to do it. So the fitness test that I did 16 years ago when I joined the fire service is still the current test. We have a beep test in that. So for the North Americans particularly, the beep test is the 20-meter multi-stage shuttle test. And what we're finding is that the combination of that with the other physical testing is actually creating a barrier for our diversity efforts. Particularly, and we're looking at, we want women in the fire service, but in our fire service, we require them to have a very high aerobic capacity, which many of them can have, but what that does is deliver smaller women. The problem then is they then can't get through the next level, which requires them to do huge upper body strengthening testing. Now, again, we need to go back to the conversation of what exactly is the job of a firefighter? Is it someone who can run a marathon, or is it somebody who is physically resilient enough to pick something up, move it across space, and do their job? And I don't think we're actually anywhere near that. And there's a lot of contextual around that. I think the question is, should it be mandatory? I oscillate between this almost daily. I think to some extent, potentially, you would like it to be mandatory, but again, what's the purpose of doing that? And there's a huge level of fear in firefighters. I can only speak from the Australian context, where many of them have nothing else to go to. What happens if they can't go back on a fire truck? And if they're being tested on something that's not an effective or reasonable test, I always cringe when the Army still use BMI as a test of fitness. That's a wellness test, not a fitness test. And the more times you make those mistakes, with your firefighters when you're in your messaging, I think you go further and further down a path of resistance where they start to push back, they start to just disengage with that. So I think right up front, you've got to understand, what are we testing? Why are we testing? And then what are we going to do about it? It's great to say, oh, look, we've got all these cancers happening. Okay, so what? In my fire service that I've just come out of, we were issued 3 sets of PPE. A house fire now is treated like a hazmat incident, whereby it's full decontamination. Gear is washed on site. All this sort of stuff's happening, which is a great example of how we've transitioned from here to here. Yet, from what I see, particularly in the American, the volunteer services, they're issued with 1 set of PPE. Great, I tested you for cancer, but what am I going to do about that? I think that's where the issue is. It's not so much, again, what I said, go back to less important to actually test people, but it's more important to test what's important. And again, I don't think we even understand the subpopulations within our area. I did some work, I was lucky to do some work with Sarah and Eric as well, where we were looking at female firefighters specifically. The part of the driver was when I was in the UK, we know zero about females going through menopause in the fire service. How can we assist them if we don't understand the underlying issues that drive some of these challenges? So I think that's where we want to go. There's a question there as well on the side here. What else? I apologise, there are some questions here. In terms of screenings for our firefighters at this stage, to be honest, we don't screen our people at all. We do nothing. We do a barrier test to get them in, and then that's it. But again, I'd be very reluctant. We're actually in the process of building a system, but I'd be very reluctant to drop in a test if we don't actually know what that is and what it's for. And then, again, I've only seen the American system from here, but your healthcare system is such that, how does that work? Is that going to bankrupt somebody if they get something? How do we train people to come off the trucks if there's an issue? That's a big fear, and I think that's why you see a lot of these older, unfit firefighters who will duck and weave and try and move through the non-operational roles. They have nowhere else to go. So we need to start to think about, how do we prepare them for a career post firefighting and actually let them transition to that. I know Eric, he can probably talk about that when he comes back on. The Dutch fire service, you've got a 20-year lifespan and then you're out the door. But during that time, they're going to prepare you to get out there. So I think that's really important. There's another one here from Dan saying health and wellness shouldn't be punitive. Hell yeah. But until the first time you sack a firefighter who doesn't hit your metric, it's now punitive, no matter how good your intentions are when you're doing that. So I think Jerry said it. We all know that one firefighter that none of us ever want to go into a fire with because they're just so unfit and so dangerous. But the question is, as soon as you remove that person, it's now a punitive thing. So that's why I oscillate between the two. I probably ranted a little bit more than I should, Debbie. So feel free to knock me off. Thank you.
No, this is great. We're actually getting through the questions really quickly. I see we've got one come through. I will go on to our next one, but we'll add it to the mix. So feel free, those that are attending, to add more questions if you have them. And again, appreciate the honesty that we're hearing today, and some different perspectives, and even discussing, that you're not sure whether it should be mandatory. I think being honest about the fact that we don't have all the answers is important too. Right. I'm going to throw the next one to Eric and to Chief Ryan. What practical initiatives have been effective in improving firefighter well-being?
Chief.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. I've made a list here in front, and I'll try not to ramble on too long. I think there's been some discussion about some of this stuff already. Chief Ledoux talked about the annual NFPA physicals here in the United States. And they've come a long way. Another one of these things that's improved over time. It is sort of a minimum standards, if you will, approach, but it does provide that baseline for the American Fire Service, at least in the career side, and hopefully volunteer companies are doing this as well, to provide the 13 essential job elements of a firefighter, what make up that NFPA physical. And I firmly believe it should be mandatory. It's there's an initiative here in the United States. Well, it's U.S. Canada, really, sponsored by the International Association of Firefighters, but the IAFC is also a part of it. Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. It's called the WFI, or the Wellness Fitness Initiative. And the benchmark, or the underlying linchpin to that is that it is supposed to be non-punitive. Now, the trick is, as Anthony mentioned, if you have to get to a point where somebody's fitness is so bad that they can't pass the physical, they can no longer perform the job functions, and therefore they can no longer be a firefighter, right? That's a risk management decision that's made by others, right? There's a liability posed by that person, but I would offer that as a fire chief, if I have somebody in my organization that's in that spot, then that's a failure on my part, all right? Or the supervisors of that firefighter, that's a failure of leadership to allow that person to have gotten to that bad of a point where they can't perform the minimum job elements. I'm not so naive as to think that's not happening out there, but that's how we have to look at it. And I know that may sound rather harsh, but that's a fact. When you do put on the gold badge, you take some ownership of that. You take ownership of the people that work for you, with you, and around you. And the rising tide lifts all ships. So it should be everybody's effort when you see somebody struggling to raise that person up. Some other things we've done. There have been tremendous improvements in firefighting turnout gear over the years. The addition of the vapor barrier layer. We've come a long way since rubber coats and rubber 3/4 boots, right? The bloodborne pathogens barriers in the gloves and the coats and the pants. The lighter weight helmets, right? Leather helmets are awesome until one is soaking wet and it weighs about 16 pounds on your head and you're wearing it for 3 or 4 hours on a long-term incident. Unless you have no neck, your neck is going to hurt. So those sorts of advancements have improved our firefighters' wellness. Something as simple as enclosing the cabs of our fire trucks, right? The glory days of yore, when there were open cabs and firefighters could stand up and ride, and we can't enclose the fire truck because then the firefighters can't see what's coming up ahead of them, and so on and so forth. And we've thankfully morphed away from that. But again, an engineering solution to a real problem. Going along with that, mandatory seatbelt use, right? Why is this so hard? Why does this have to be so hard, especially here, to get people to wear seatbelts? I don't know how many more NIOSH line of duty death reports we need to read or see about firefighters being ejected from apparatus when they could have avoided that by simply putting on their seatbelt. And the enforcement of that by fire chiefs and company officers and chief officers, and having those hard conversations. And if that means you have to stroke the pen on somebody to get the message across, then the purpose of discipline is to correct behavior, not to punish. So work on correcting the behavior. There was reference to the on-scene washdown that's done, or the on-scene gross decontamination. We do that here in Tucson. Every structure fire that takes place, we employ that hazmat concept, and there is a unit that is assigned to do just that and perform gross decon and a scrub down of the firefighters that have been in the IDLH, in the harmful environment. And that gear gets bagged and brought back to the stations, where every one of our stations has an extractor in it, and the crews can wash their gear. Providing that second set of gear is critical too, and scheduled gear cleaning in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations, rather than just hanging it back on the rack and letting it sit for the next call and the next call and the next call while it accumulates those known carcinogens. Expanded use of breathing apparatus. Here in Tucson, you go to a fire ground, you're going to see our engineers, our apparatus operators, wearing SCBA. Okay, they may not have their full turnout gear on, but the pump operator is going to be wearing SCBA, and that's because not only are they possibly in the area of contaminants from the structure fire itself, but they're operating around a vehicle that's pumping out how many pounds of diesel exhaust per hour while it's running. Our fire investigators, they often get forgotten in this mix, but the use of SCBA for our fire investigators during an investigation after the fire is out, when we know the science tells us the products of combustion and the carcinogens are still present in off-gassing. So we need to protect those people too. The clean cab concept, or the cleaner cab, getting that dirty gear out of the vehicle compartment. You think about, in the fire-based EMS system, we don't have, hopefully, a lot of contaminated medical stuff rolling around the back of our ambulances and medic trucks. We shouldn't have it in our fire trucks either. And we've come a long way with that. Some environmental things that we've done that I think have helped the evolution of what's known as heart saver tones, right? The old klaxons of the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. We know that puts undue stress on people, right? That has a proven cardiac effect. So now the technology exists for a more pleasant but effective alert tone that wakes firefighters up if they're on the 24-hour shift to send them to their calls. Station design, as simple things like not having the firefighting turnout gear hanging up in the apparatus bay, not having the firefighters workout space in the apparatus bay, not having your ice machine in the apparatus bay. All really simple things that take a little bit of engineering and maybe a little bit of cost. I'm not saying it's, the gold standard's achievable everywhere, but there are things we can all do environmentally to make the workspace better to help our firefighters' overall wellness. One of the things we've touched on here in Tucson, we're actually in the process of doing a number of station tear down and rebuilds. And part of that is a thought about looking at what goes on the walls of those fire stations. I know coming up in the fire service, you go into any fire station in the United States and you would see pictures, not necessarily in the public area, but pictures of terrible fires, horrific auto accidents, things like that we know are mental triggers for people who suffer from PTSD or other issues. Why would we want to continually subject our members to that? Or the ones who aren't willing or able feel comfortable enough speaking up about it. So we're really taking a proactive approach to that here and thinking about what goes on the walls of our firehouses and what we expose our crews to. And then the last thing I'll touch on, and I'll turn it over to Eric, and this is probably heresy in some parts of the United States, but we talk about cancer presumptive laws and the amazing strides that have been made there. How about this? How about an all-out 100% ban on any type of tobacco use, right? We know our profession puts us at a statistically greater rate of contracting a wide variety of cancers, developing a wide variety of cancers. Yet there are fire departments in the United States that won't tell their members you can't smoke on duty, you can't chew tobacco on duty. Those personal environmental choices will make it extremely difficult for that firefighter later in their career to have a successful presumptive cancer claim in the workers' compensation or industrial commission environment, right? So again, engineering control, it is a cultural shift, but these are the kind of things we need to do as fire service leaders that may not be the most popular, but 20, 30 years from now, will have those downstream wellness effects. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Chief, for this very clear conversation. I would like to go back to the initial question, which was what practical initiatives have been effective in improving firefighter well-being. And before, I would like to mention some of the interventions that were taken here in the Netherlands. I think that a successful practical intervention is always preceded by a clear vision and by awareness of the people who are leading the fire service. And it was until 20 years ago that, for example, for physical and medical testing, we didn't know anything about that actually. So what I mentioned before, it was all based on opinions. And about 15-20 years ago, there was this switch, and then people started to say, well, we need to do that in a different way. And then we started to work on more the role-based tests, the role-based medical tests and physical tests. So actually, that's what are the risks of firefighting, and what does a firefighter need? What kind of fitness does he need, and how can we test that? And there was a switch from the more gym-based physical testing to functional testing, and it also goes for the medical test. So we were very much more focused on the needs of the of what does a firefighter really do, and how do we need to test, how do we how do you have to test them. And I think that was a big shift in thinking about firefighter wellness and firefighter health as well. So that was one thing. So the division on firefighter wellness changed by that moment. And the other thing was the awareness that firefighters are just human beings with limitations in terms of health and performance, instead of tools that just can be used without consequences for health and performance. So this vision and this awareness started up a lot of new kinds of intervention that really helped to improve firefighter wellness. At this moment, we are, and I go back to the testing part, and Anthony also was mentioning that, because I was involved in the development of the Dutch firefighting medical and physical test, and we developed a physical test, for example, which is totally functional. So it's not about sit-ups, push-ups, and some aerobic run, for example, but all very. It's a test with a high phase validity, so it's ecological validity. So it's and that also goes for the medical part. So we only test those parts of the body, those physiological parts of the bodies also that are really involved in firefighting. So that was a big shift. And you're talking about the annual screenings. Well, we also have a system in that. So we have we test, we do the physical test every year for every active firefighter, and it depends on the age of a firefighter, what the frequency is of the medical and the physical test. So the older you get, the more you have to be tested. Besides that, we also have now, and I think that's a big improvement, that we have a lot of supportive teams, like well-trained health and performance instructors, physical training instructors, lifestyle coaches, who are also working to have the firefighter population in a good physical, medical, but also mental health status. There are a lot of educational initiatives, and also, and Anthony mentioned that already. We are already also starting to look at different groups within the population of firefighters. And Anthony mentioned that already. We're looking also to group of female firefighters, and I had the honor to publish a paper together with Sarah and Anthony, and also the colleagues from the University of Brighton in England. And so you see that there's more attention to different groups within the fire service. And also another thing that Chief Ryan just mentioned, we're trying to have the best PPE you can think of. So the Dutch firefighters also have 3 sets of turnout gear, and it's also cleaned after every deployment. So that's a lot of initiatives that are taking place. We're going slow, although we're already busy with this for 15-20 years, but it's still going very slow. But we're getting somewhere step by step.
Thank you both. That's actually a great segue to Dave Robertson's question, and I'm going to put this one to Andy. Have any of you experienced any significant pushback in trying to put forward wellbeing initiatives, and how did you deal with it, or how are you currently dealing with it? Oh, you're on mute.
I'll take this from quite a personal journey. So when I was still on the trucks, I wanted to try and improve our physical and our psychological health. So I put together an initiative to, we used a physio, strength and conditioning coach, went into the gym and got the benefits out of our hour spend doing PT. So make sure that we were becoming physically capable of doing our job. So, and the cost to do it was a few $1,000s. It wasn't a lot, but I could link it to injury data really, really easy. Say, this is the injuries we've had lifting incorrectly in our gyms, and here's the money I can save if I do that. Then I looked at the psychological stuff, and I engaged with a psychologist, and I said, can you come in and talk and explain how the brain works and stress responses and that sort of thing. So he put together a proposal, and it was probably about a third of the cost. Significant, like, why are we doing this? What tangible outcomes? And I think the reason why we got so much pushback is that the psychological wellness, people can't see it and they don't understand it as well. So they want to see tangible things, and especially people that hold the money. What are we getting for this money? So I think the where you get some pushback, it's usually lack of education or lack of understanding, and certainly, and some of the other speakers have touched on it. That male, it's a male-dominated workforce, and people think men don't cry and all that sort of thing. So people won't be vulnerable to say, actually, I'm not sure about this stuff, but let's give it a try. So you got to take people on that journey with you and say, why don't we give it a try? Or are we happy doing what we've always done, getting those same outcomes? And I know for me, and certainly the statistics around firefighters and psychological well-being, we're above the averages in just about every nation in the world compared to. So if you get pushback, you got to just try and allow them to understand why you want to do it, and let them come on the journey with you. It might take some time, but you'll win them over in the end. Hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks, Andy. I'm going to put the next question to Selena and to Todd. What is the most surprising insight that you have uncovered in your research?
Hello again. I was very, I won't say shocked, but I do community risk reduction. Once I came off of the truck, I am your local fire prevention person and community risk reduction. And in community risk reduction, we see everything else as a risk, but we don't see firefighters physically and mentally as a risk. And I was very shocked about that in all of the research that I did, because we're a risk. My thing is that the only time we want to move the fire truck is when we're going to get something to eat. Because the less we move the fire truck, now, we know that we're going to have incidents, but the less we can move that fire truck through education, every time that fire truck moves, and me as a community risk reduction person, when I educate, I see the education, but every time I see that truck leave out of the station, I think, how are my firefighters going to come back if they get on scene, or even if they get in an accident? So the firefighter is a risk, and how much money and how much time are we willing to put into it as we do our equipment? Because I'm an equipment as well. I would like for you to value me and put some money and some time and effort into me. But then on the flip side of that quarter, as soon as we get off, and I hate to leave everybody, I'm going straight to the gym. The gym is there. You're free to go. And at 5 o'clock, or, whenever the free time is, people are doing other stuff. So it is one of those things, it can be a department, mandated, situation. It can. Most are optional. And that's another thing that I found in the research, that the majority of volunteer fire departments, they don't have a a physical, mandate or anything like that. But as a firefighter, you should know when those pants are getting a little tight. You should know a little bit to back up off the table, which is another thing. I don't have a stove at my house. I don't cook, don't want to cook, not learning how to cook. We're not going to have stove fires over here. But my eating, I have a strict eating regimen. I exercise. I always tell people I hit the lottery with my numbers. So it's a personal thing as well. But, how do you, as Sarah said, how do you have those talks with someone whom you feel or who you know? And we have annual physicals every year. And that's the only time when a lot of people find out what's going on with them. My late mother would bribe my late father with chocolate cake to get him to go to the doctor. It was just a culture where my dad said he was fine. My mom said, no, you're not. You need to go. He went because he got the chocolate cake. Now, he would have got a chocolate rice cake from me, but, hey, however he got there, he got there. So it's just to me, the research on the money that we spend on other things, but we don't want to spend on the most precious commodity that we have, which is the firefighters, their mind, their bodies, and their souls.
Right, over to you, Todd. Oh, you're on mute.
Great overview from Lieutenant Smith. I mean, we just had here in the States Fire Prevention Week. We call it Community Risk Reduction. I can't echo enough what the lieutenant said. In fact, I've written on this recently for fire engineering, the need for human risk reduction. In placing just as much emphasis on human risk reduction. So, the question about the research, I'm going to give a shout out. I probably don't do it enough. I joke with her all the time. She's my little sister, but to Dr. Sarah Janke, I had the honor really of being involved in so much research as a fire service advisor. To so many great colleagues and researchers, but she did a project about a decade ago that my department was involved in. It was called the, you can look this up online, it was funded by FEMA, the Fuel to Fight study, and it looked at 10 departments that had implemented health and wellness programs. Largely as Chief Ryan alluded to, the Health and Wellness Initiative here in the States, it's a joint labor management approach. And 10 departments that really had not, I'll call it failed to thrive. They just really didn't invest in health and wellness of their employees. My department was in one of those 10, the ones that just, we did good entry-level physicals, maybe not even just, decent entry-level physicals, but then really didn't focus on our employees much during their career. And that was a wake-up call for me because what it found was how much unhealthier the departments that did not invest in health and wellness programs, whether that be physicals or nutrition or functional fitness or medical exams, comprehensive exams, were so much at higher risk. They were heavier. They had higher rates of preventable diseases in events, cardiac events, and so to me that was a wake-up call. And like I said, I've been involved. LifeScan, we just did some work with Dr. Denise Smith on. I think I mentioned earlier, 80% of firefighters that have sudden cardiac events and death have enlarged left hearts. But the majority of that is from hypertension, being obesity, overweight. It is not addressing, one, we can screen for it, but addressing the underlying root causes. So when we look at research, we've been blessed, really blessed. I want to say that for all of our researchers, like Sarah and so many others that have given us as the fire service and leaders in the fire service, labor and management, with just so much more clarity on what we need to be focusing on as leaders, and that's our people. I'll end with this. It's kind of hard to do virtually, but I do this in person all the time, and it to me, it is so powerful every time I do it. I ask a room full of an audience full of colleagues and coworkers that I'm presenting to, how many folks here have a preventative maintenance program for your apparatus? Stand up or raise your hand. And almost every person in the room, almost 100%, raise their hands or stand up. So we would never think, of putting our folks in a apparatus with bald tires, no brakes, no warning systems, and windshield wipers that don't work. That would be foreign to most all of us. But then I ask how many, and NFPA has done this more probably scientifically than myself, how many folks here have a comprehensive annual ongoing health and wellness program for your firefighters? Stand up, raise your hand. And to me, unfortunately, we still have a lot of work to do. Almost in every presentation I do, and I'm blessed to do a ton of these around the globe, like many of the other colleagues that are on today's panel, and only about, if we get 50%, that's a good number. So to me, that's inversely what we need to be doing. And for those, I know we've got a great sign up of attendees today, and hopefully with the recorded version, we'll have even greater reach. But I think the lieutenant and I are saying the same thing. Let's challenge each other to kind of flip those, inverse those priorities. And I want to be mindful. Chief Ryan said it well as a fire chief. You've got to balance a lot of things to be successful and bring the organization to a point of meeting community expectations. But I can tell you this: you don't have a fire department if you don't have healthy firefighters. And I'll just leave it with that. And I hope, I'm honored to follow the lieutenant's comments. I think we dovetailed off of each other, and hopefully there's some insight between both of our perspectives.
Great, thank you both. I'm after that great shout out, I'm going to get Sarah and Chief Richardson's onto this one. In an industry where such incredible resilience is needed, how do we break the stigma that needing support is a sign of weakness?
Go ahead, Sarah.
So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. And I think one of the first things is things like this, having conversations about it. I think having national and international conversations about it is one of the things that's really important. And just starting those conversations like at the macro level and at the micro level, like having those conversations around the kitchen table. And there's been a lot of discussion about what happens there and what's so strong and resilience building about the fire service. And it is what happens around the kitchen table. So I would suggest kind of at all levels having that conversation. I would also say testimonials are good. People who have struggled, who are willing to say, here's what I experienced, and helping people to understand. I had someone challenge me the other day when I was we were talking around mental health and resilience. And they said, I think it's great. And publicly, I'm very supportive, but honestly, like, I don't get it. It doesn't bother me. I don't think that it's impacted my life at all. And it was it was someone who I really respect. It was an interesting thing to hear that perspective. And my response to him was, because he said, is something wrong with me because it's not bothering me? Is that, we have some other choice words to use in colorful language there, but I'm trying to be more appropriate today for once. And so my response was, there's nothing wrong with you if it doesn't bother you, as long as you realize that it might not always be that way. I mean, I've talked to people who felt like they went years with that stuff. I've heard often the metaphor of like, it's like having, you have your worst calls and you lock them away in your mind, or you file them away in a file box. You have to be careful, kind of letting who you give the key to and those types of things. And I love the metaphor, I think what we have to get to, though, is helping people and having the conversations about the fact that those things are in your mind. And like biologically, it's not, they are experiences that you've had. There is the brain is not just a mushy thing that you shove stuff in and pull stuff out. Like, it's coded in there. Your experiences and your memories are all in there. So just understanding that it's okay if you're okay today, and it's okay if you're not okay tomorrow, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. I think the other thing we need to talk about with stigma is kind of attacking it at all levels in terms of where people are in their career. Like, how people are affected a year in or 2 years in might be very different. I think I've given a talk a couple of times recently about the job of being in fire service leadership, being a chief, and how that's, Frank Lito from FDNY reported or used the quote, "It's the loneliest job in the fire service." And I've given a couple presentations around that, and kind of like the self-care and the awareness of what chiefs need to be looking for, and paying attention to their own health. And it's really easy to like walk the walk. And I do this with my own job, where I'm like, okay, everyone, like, focus on health and wellness, do all these wonderful things, take care of yourself. And I'm like, except don't miss work tomorrow because we've got a lot of stuff to do. So I think it's paying attention to when leaders, I think part of reducing the stigma is we need leaders and people in chiefs positions to also go, wait a minute, like, I am not superhuman. You're not superhuman. Let's all, have some compassion with each other when we realize that someone's struggling. So I really think it's these types of things, just carrying on the conversation, continuing the conversation at all levels, on all. I mean, sometimes it feels like we're a hammer and everything's a nail, but I think the only way to move past the stigma is to keep having the conversation, because that someone who wants to hear it today might not have wanted to hear it yesterday, and may need to hear it extra 3 days from now. So that's my answer.
I think Sarah brings up some great points. And while she was talking, I was reminded of a line of duty death that we had, and we recently did a service for. And different people have different triggers. But I think we break that stigma by modeling what we expect of our colleague leaders, be chiefs or lieutenants. We provide the example that, for everyone to understand that we all experience physical and emotional trauma. I don't care how long you've been doing this, whether you're a paramedic or an EMT or a firefighter, all three, or you're in the office now. No one's immune to the effects this job has on us. We also do it by normalizing the various modalities available to us. Here at South Metro, we're fortunate to have, I would argue, the best wellness division in the country. We have professional sports trainers, we have neurofeedback, we have fantastic peer support people that parlay into an EAP program, and we really talk about this a lot. Unfortunately, we've had several tragedies in the last 3 years, along with 3 mergers, which creates a completely different cultural example. But we need to provide time for our people to decompress after these incidents, and we need to start those incidents at the end with informal conversations about the traumatic incident, and share personal experiences. One that I've shared before in some of these forums is my very first cardiac arrest as a paramedic student was a 6-month-old baby girl that was a drowning victim. And I was doing fine on the call, and then my preceptor said, "Hey, your daughter's 6 months old. How much do you think this kid weighs?" while I was trying to intubate her. Safe to say that kind of changed my outcome on that call. That was 25 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. So we all have those experiences, and I have done that after cardiac arrests or other calls where, pediatric calls, things like that. So it's about us as leaders showing the empathy and the compassion, and showing that we've had it too. The worst thing we can do is let our young firefighters think that it's only them. We have to normalize it, that this happens to all of us. Most importantly, we need to lead empathetically, and we need to communicate that asking for help is a sign of strength. I recently finished reading the book Think Again by Adam Grant, which I would highly recommend. One of the quotes in there was, "Increase your question to answer ratio." And to me, what that means is I'm asking the questions, whether it's during a post-incident analysis, a quick hot wash at the back of the ambulance after the hospital, or maybe when I stop by the station to talk to people. I want to see where they're at. So ask questions from a place of curiosity rather than making statements from a place of judgment, and then listen. And like I said earlier, look at the nonverbal cues of your people. We have therapy dogs, which are phenomenal. From a leadership perspective, the best thing you can do is bring in a therapy dog, because I'll tell you what, they will go right to the person that is suffering the most internally, whether you can see it or not, because we all have a great way of putting on a poker face saying, oh no, it's not bothering me, but the dogs know. So that's been huge for us. So that's what I have. I want to thank everybody for joining us and the privilege of being able to speak to everybody and hear from my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you so much, Chief Richard. I think that you being open and vulnerable about what you've gone through in a forum like this is such a step in making it okay for everybody else to talk. So I appreciate your honesty there. Right, we're going to move on to our last questions because we're kind of running out of time. And I'm going to throw this one to Chief Strike and Chief Kerrigan. And this one's a little bit more about yourself, but has there been a time that you've had to address your own well-being?
Sure, go ahead, Chief.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, this is a little bit more personal, but I think it actually, I mean, I think people need to hear this stuff too, because it again goes back to, we're all you're all human beings, and I don't care who you are. If you're in this fire service, it affects everybody, and I'm no different. I mean, I can think of, I'll give you 3 examples really quickly. One having to do with my own fitness, and I can tell you that, that realization, I half joke about it, but at that time, I go back to Chief Ryan's comment. This month will be 36 years in the fire service for me, and I think there's some days that I still think I'm invincible, but I know that not to be the case. And I probably first figured that out back in my early to mid 40s, when I realized that I wasn't getting it done at the level that I needed to get it done, and more importantly, recovering from those fires as quickly as I was used to recovering, without actually paying more attention to my own physical health, right? So that was the first eye opener for me personally, was just that, our bodies deteriorate. Sarah can tell you all about that, at length, I'm sure, from a scientific point of view. But, we cannot, our 22-year-old brains, go one way, our 40-something-year-old bodies go the other way. We can't maintain that level without taking better care of ourselves. To Todd's point about medical evaluations, we're lucky here at my department to have a very comprehensive health and wellness program that includes those medical evaluations. And my personal example of that is that one of the ones that I went through, it came up with an abnormality that I had to then go down that path and get tested and do all kinds of things, to make sure that, knock on wood, that, it came out on the good side for me, but it was something that, it really opened my eyes to, here I am preaching about it all the time. And then I go to get my physical and something comes back on my own results that I need to go get checked. And it's another really, really big eye opener for me, and proof that it works. And if it were something a little more significant, that I would have caught it right at the very inception, and I would have had a really good chance to do a better job of dealing with it. Thankfully, it was nothing, but you don't know that unless you get checked, right? So, and then the last thing on the medical, on the behavioral side, I mean, I can tell you that, Scott and Sarah both mentioned triggers, and I found that at this point in my career, knowing what I've been through, what I've seen, that for me personally, I've noticed more recently in the last few years that there are triggers that bring me back to that stuff that have absolutely nothing to do with the fire service, right? So it's going to manifest in different ways for different people. It could be something family related. It could be something you see, something you experience, something you smell or taste. It could be something different for everybody. But I can tell you that it's going to happen if it hasn't for most people. I sit here telling you that I shouldn't even be here talking to you because of a fire that I was nearly killed in, for example, right? And I'm okay with that, but you know, it comes back in other ways sometimes, and it has nothing to do with firefighting. You know, the things that I've seen, some people mention child tragedies and stuff like that. You know, there's things that come back in my brain sometimes that I have to stop and think about that I know are directly associated with traumatic experiences that I've had over the last 36 years of this career. I wouldn't change it for a thing, but folks, if it hasn't happened to you yet, you cannot ever assume that it won't. You know, you have to be self-aware, and you have to be willing to talk to people and get the help you need if you need it, and make sure that you stick around for the long haul. And I'm living proof of that. So, you know, it's good to share these kind of personal experiences, right? Because I think, you know, people look at us, especially if they view us as, you know, sort of thought leaders or experts in health and wellness area of the fire service or whatever. We're just human beings too. You know, I could train and work out all the time and still fall over, you know, from a heart attack, right? Just like anybody else. But I don't want to make that risk any worse than it has to be, right? So, but still, we don't, you know, we don't stop training because we could still get killed at a fire, right? So we shouldn't stop taking care of ourselves because something might happen to us anyway. We just need to do a better job of watching out for each other and you know, and knowing ourselves and knowing what our triggers are and addressing them when they come out.
Yeah, and let me, you know, things change when you retire. I'm in my, you know, I'm coming up to almost my second year of retirement, and I'm still downloading. And I've had a very active career as a company officer. I've been fortunate health-wise. I haven't had any health issues and no meds or anything. I have had a couple, you know, both my knees rebuilt and a nail through the toe and those kinds of things. But the bigger challenge for me came when I became a fire chief. I was in my 18th year as an ops chief, and just, you know, you look back at it, and I'm sure we all have those times where we really loved, you know, that period of time in our career. But I became a fire chief. My network, you know, guided me into a chief's position. I applied for a national search and came in from the outside, and I was given a piece of paper to professionalize. And I've never been hired for the status quo. And as I am leaning back, and even during the time, you know, that took a lot of mental stress that changed really who I became. And I became a fire chief right before the United States, the Great Recession in 2008. And I inherited a group of people that, you know, they just, one, didn't like the fact that I was there. Two, they're just not nice people. And one of those individuals actually changed my life after about a year and a half of dealing with this individual who was bullying me from the bottom up. I didn't know much about bullying then, but I certainly know a lot about it now, and have taught across the country about this topic. But this individual was just a mean, big old guy who didn't want anybody telling him what to do. And as a new fire chief, you know, you don't want to lose. In fact, we never train to lose in the fire service, which may be one of our problems. We never train for a hose to bust or a, you know, or a house to burn down. We just train for a win. But that mindset carried forward with me for many years. And the fact that this individual was so detrimental that he threatened me personally, and, you know, created fear in my family to the point where I had to purchase a handgun. I hadn't carried a gun since the military. And it scared me, and it changed who I am. I'm a typically happy, fun, you know, joking kind of character. And my colleagues would tell me that I've changed to the point where I'm a little bit, or had been a little bit more silent. And I've had people come up to me at conferences in my early days and say, "Hey, you okay, Strike?" "Yeah, I'm okay. Of course I'm okay. You just don't look like it yourself." And I denied that. But this individual eventually came to the fire station, and I know what he came to the fire station to do after 3 months of administrative leave. And I'm thankful to be here today, because if you're not aware, people do get killed at the fire station. An hour or so after this individual came to the fire station, I was meeting with an individual in my office. Fortunately, I don't know all the details because there's no cameras, but I know based off our discussions in jail and domestics and all kinds of other things that occurred with him, that he may have been coming to the station to take care of the guy he didn't like. And within hours of that incident, he ended up killing his wife and killing himself. And our firefighters responded to that incident, and the tones went off when I was in bed. And I knew the address, I knew the individual, and but I lived a half hour away. So I was racing to the fire scene in Mach 80, trying to determine who the individual that was down at this address, holding back the fire crew so they didn't get shot or hurt. And my phone rang. And who was on the line? The girl that I've known since I was in my 20s, and I'm still married to today. I pick up the phone, red lights and siren, and she says to me, "Is he going to come and get us?" I live in a house of girls and ladies today, but it would have been a really easy setup to call in an incident and take my family out. Those are the realities of the decisions we're making as leaders when we discipline, or when we try to build a culture of winning and inclusivity and all of that stuff. But it changed me. And how did I know I changed? Well, I went through a study, actually. The University of Minnesota was assisting some of my peers here in Minnesota that were working on mental health and cancer. And I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." And talking to the doctor, he started to say, "We should talk a little further." And wouldn't you know it, yes, I had a bunch of stuff built up I needed to get out related to being a manager. And, you want to win. You want people to like you. You want your peers and you want your leaders, your bosses, to know you're doing good things. So there are periods of time as a leader and a manager when we start to seclude ourselves from others and even our work. And I see it in some of my peers even today. And those are the times when we need to hang on. And we need to continue to knock on the door and ring the phone. We need to go in there and just keep track of our friends and our family, knowing the environment we work in, not just the scene stuff, but how about the leaders who are constantly getting beaten down? And I know chiefs that have been their first day on the job, the union president comes in and think, "Hey, welcome aboard, chief. Just want you to know you don't run this department. We do." And I think many of us can relate to that. It's not an easy job anymore. And that's why we need to build quality people, quality officers, give them the tools, because I didn't have the tools, even though I have degrees and so on, much like you. Nobody teaches us how to talk to somebody when they come into our office and tell us they're going to kill themselves, or when they lost their house, or are going through a divorce. There's not a lot of resources out there to offer. So from a mental perspective, I would say, we need to have the brave talk. We need to quit talking about the weather and talk about John's mom who just passed away from cancer, and how do they feel? How do you just tell us how you feel? We're here for you. We're here to listen. And I like the comment earlier, spend more time listening than answering questions. So have I had issues? Yeah, I've had my issues. I feel really good today, of course, but somebody noticed it and somebody said something, and that was very powerful and meaningful to me, that someone could see across the table that I wasn't the person that I was then and that I am today. So I would love to hear comments from others about being a leader, a company officer. It does come with burden. There's no doubt about it. But I always go back to what Jack Schmidt told me when I was 19 years old, particularly on the scene. He said, Strike, you'll have nothing to do with what happened before you get to the emergency. It's already happening. But you have a heck of a lot to do with what happens when you get there. So make sure you're fit, make sure you're trained, and make sure you know where the equipment is. And the same is true with being a leader. Is leaders need more leaders to surround one another so that we too can talk about what's going on in the fire stations, so we don't feel so secluded, because we don't want to talk about it. We think we're the only ones in the world going through the problem. The fact is, some of those problems have been solved many times ago. And I'll end at that.
Wow, thank you, Jerry. That is quite a story. I know I've said it actually to a few answers, but I can't thank you all enough for your honesty and your vulnerability. You've all certainly practiced what you've preached today with your openness, and I have no doubt that it's going to make a difference to people. You actually, Jerry, touched on one of our previous topics on leadership and actually how tough it can be at times. So I encourage those that have missed it to go back and look at past topics on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us. There will be a recording of today's session. It's live immediately on YouTube, so feel free to share it to anyone who might find it interesting. And we'll see you in about a month for our discussion on training. And thanks again. Thanks, speakers. You were awesome.